A country renowned for its neutrality and peace, which has not participated in any war for over 500 years, could openly criticize a U.S. president, and all of this happened because of a simple action at the World Economic Forum. Switzerland's strong response to Donald Trump's Switzerland, a country famous for its beautiful alpine landscapes, is known not only for its tranquility, but also for its firm principles of peace and neutrality. So why would such a nation choose to publicly oppose one of the world's biggest political figures, Donald Trump? The story began at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Trump sparked a major controversy by calling for tariffs on European countries. For nations that have collaborated with the U.S. for decades, this move caused frustration, and no one could stay silent, especially Switzerland. Switzerland, which typically avoids participating in international trade debates, found Trump's actions crossing the line of patience. Moreover, the way he presented his statements led this neutral country, which values neutrality, to feel compelled to speak out. Reasons behind Switzerland's response. Switzerland, as you can see, is the only country in the world that has not participated in military conflicts since 1815 and has a strong economy with a GDP nearing $800 billion in 2024 and an unemployment rate under 3%. However, while the U.S. faces many challenges in maintaining its global influence, Trump's actions have caused neighboring countries to reassess their roles in a changing world. This raises questions about the balance between power and neutrality in international relations. Switzerland, although maintaining a neutral stance, has shown that it can adjust its strategies to protect national interests. According to a United Nations report, Switzerland has upheld its neutrality policy not just for geopolitical reasons, but also due to long-term financial strategies. The country is a global financial hub, home to international organizations, including the World Central Bank. With this financial stability, Switzerland has become a model for maintaining independence and influence on the global stage. What sparked Switzerland's strong reaction? So what made the people of Switzerland, known for their peaceful and neutral stance, react so strongly? Let's take a look at the Carnival Festival in Basel, one of the most prominent and awaited events of the year. During this festival, thousands of people participate in a special parade, wearing masks and throwing confetti, sending a strong message, reflecting on issues they cannot ignore. This is rare in Switzerland, a place where public protests are almost non-existent, representing a creative and peaceful form of expressing dissent. This act isn't a direct condemnation of U.S. policies, but rather a personal response to a leadership model that they view as incompatible with the peace and fairness values Switzerland has upheld for over 5 centuries. The attitude of the Swiss people. What is particularly noteworthy is the dissatisfaction the people of Switzerland have towards Trump, even more than historical figures like Napoleon, Hitler, and Putin. A country that always respects neutrality has chosen to speak out strongly, and this has shocked many. The people here aren't just opposing Trump's policies. They are deeply dissatisfied with his leadership style, which they see as completely contrary to the values of a neutral country, where people value fairness and respect for the rights of every nation. This shows that the importance of maintaining peace and international relationships is increasingly being challenged in a volatile world. When countries like Switzerland, known for their unwavering commitment to neutrality, feel compelled to reflect on a superpower like the U.S., it signals that the world is changing. Will we see more smaller nations like Switzerland speak out in the future as the foreign policies of global powers like the U.S. become increasingly hardline? The shift in how these countries face international pressure could create strong waves of reaction, especially when they feel their core values are under threat. This also raises the question of whether smaller nations will be able to maintain their neutrality in a world that is becoming more polarized. Let's explore this together. Trump has just doubled the tariffs on aluminum and steel from Canada, and the price to pay could be a global recession. So, how will this decision impact the U.S. and Canadian economies?
Breaking news, President Trump saying he is now doubling the tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel.
The latest announcement from President Trump has shocked the entire U.S. financial market. The move to double the tariffs from 25% to 50% on Canadian aluminum and steel is a strong action. This comes right after the Ontario government imposed a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S. This escalation not only affects the steel industry, but also strikes a direct blow to the global supply chain, just 48 hours after Trump's announcement.
In a row, the Dow Jones down now. Take a look at this. You see the Dow is way down getting close to 600 points now, 622 points down right now, 622.
The stock market continues to slide, and financial experts from Goldman Sachs have raised the forecast for a U.S. recession to 20%, 5% higher than before. While Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell insists that the economy remains stable, it's clear the stock market doesn't believe that. Trump isn't just targeting aluminum and steel. He's also threatening to impose tariffs on imported cars from Canada on April 2nd. This could send Canada's auto industry into crisis. GM, Ford, and Stellantis all have factories in Canada, and if these tariffs are enforced, the auto supply chain will be disrupted, directly affecting products sold in the U.S. Canada isn't backing down from threats. Premier Doug Ford made a strong statement, condemning Trump's actions as an unjustified attack on Canada's economy and citizens.
Saying that it will be an absolute disaster for both countries, and people will be unemployed, plants will shut down, assembly lines will shut down, and inflation's going to happen within days. So this is unfortunate. One person's responsible, and that's President Trump.
Canada has spoken up, ready to retaliate with specific measures. They're not just talking about responding, but have already prepared powerful economic levers to minimize the impact on themselves. In reality, Canada already has some defensive measures in place. Canada's Ministry of Trade has announced a series of steps, which could include imposing tariffs on goods imported from the U.S. to balance out the unfairness in trade. This could cause major disruptions in U.S. industries like food, automotive, and especially the U.S. agriculture sector. This escalation won't just cause damage to one side. The Canadian government has estimated that they could lose around $16 billion from Trump's tariff decisions in the past year. If this trade war continues, these losses will only rise. What's concerning is that not just Canada, but even U.S. investors and companies are feeling the massive impact from the escalating trade war. For example, with the decision to impose tariffs on aluminum and steel, many U.S. companies face higher costs, increased production expenses, and eventually the prices of goods in the U.S. will rise. This not only reduces consumer purchasing power, but also makes it harder for many industries to maintain profits. Sectors like automotive, electronics, and even construction could be heavily impacted. With the events unfolding, this war isn't just between the U.S. and Canada. Trump's decisions have raised concerns not only within countries, but also major economies like the European Union and China are closely watching. If the U.S. doesn't soon stop its tariff hikes, the risk is that other countries will retaliate as well. And this could lead to a global trade war. It's certain that if these decisions aren't adjusted, we'll see long-lasting effects not just on the U.S. and Canada, but also on the global economy. But it's in these difficult times that there's also an opportunity for nations to cooperate and find alternative solutions, benefiting everyone. Stay tuned for the next exciting developments.
Well, there are no delays at all. No, nothing to do with the market. I'm not even looking at the market because long-term, the United States will be very strong with what's happening here.
Donald Trump just held a highly controversial press conference at the White House. And instead of reassuring the public, he made everything worse. From threatening to withdraw from NATO, reversing tariff policies, to cutting social benefits, Trump made a series of shocking statements. But is this a calculated political strategy or just a series of chaotic decisions? In a highly controversial statement, Trump questioned NATO's commitment to protecting the U.S. if attacked. Despite the fact that NATO invoked Article 5 after 9/11 to assist the U.S., he asked,
if the United States was in trouble and we called them, we said, we got a problem, France, we got a problem, a couple of others I won't mention. Do you think they're going to come and protect us? They're supposed to. I'm not so sure.
Trump didn't stop there. He reiterated his firm stance that if a NATO country doesn't contribute enough to defense spending, the U.S. will not protect them.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend. I said that 7 years ago.
When asked if this was an official U.S. policy, Trump doubled down.
Well, I think it's common sense, right? If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. You said, oh, he's violating NATO.
These statements directly challenge NATO's core principle, where all members commit to collective defense. Is Trump genuinely considering withdrawing from NATO? Or is this just a pressure tactic? Trump defended his economic policies, claiming that inflation is only temporary and that farmers will benefit from it.
We have to do, there'll always be a little short-term interruption. I don't think it's going to be big, but the countries and companies that have been ripping us aren't particularly happy with what I'm doing. But the United States will be very happy. And, you know, our farmers are going to be very happy.
At the same time, Trump reversed his own tariff policy, temporarily lifting tariffs on some imports from Canada and Mexico for 1 month in an attempt to pressure them on immigration and fentanyl smuggling.
I told them, that's it. This was a short-term deal. And they came back to me yesterday. They said, could we have some help on the tariffs because of the speed? And I said, look, I'm going to do it, but that's it. Don't come back to me after the April 2nd. I don't want to hear from you after April 2nd.
But here's the issue. Trump has repeatedly changed his stance on tariffs, leaving businesses in a state of uncertainty. Is Trump truly protecting the U.S. economy or just creating more chaos? One of the strangest moments in the press conference was when Trump signed a proclamation honoring Women's History Month and claimed his administration has done a lot for women.
In honor of all the wonderful women in your administration, all the wonderful women in America, and in honor of everything you've done for women and this administration has done for women in just, what, a month and a half? So.
Yeah, we've done a lot.
But the reality is, this is the same man who has faced multiple accusations of sexual assault. The same man who bragged about groping women in a leaked tape. Trump then announced that Elon Musk would oversee mass layoffs in the federal government, affecting veterans, Social Security recipients, and infrastructure projects.
Elon and the group are going to be watching them, and if they can cut, it's better. And if they don't cut, then Elon will do the cutting.
This clearly signals massive job cuts, potentially affecting millions of Americans. Is Trump implementing necessary reforms or pushing the U.S. into a new crisis? The U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, sparking fierce backlash from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In response, Canada is considering countermeasures that could hit the U.S. energy market. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a stunning pivot, calling for immediate peace talks just days after meeting Donald Trump. For years, Zelensky vowed to fight until victory, but now he's calling for negotiations. His reasoning? Ukraine's economy is collapsing. Western aid is shrinking, military costs are soaring, and public support is starting to erode. Experts say this isn't just about diplomacy. It's about survival. Without a deal, Ukraine faces a financial meltdown. Its GDP has plummeted, foreign investment is drying up, and key industries are on the verge of collapse. Behind closed doors, Washington is growing impatient. How much longer will the U.S. bankroll this war? Some officials are quietly pushing Kyiv to accept a ceasefire. Meanwhile, reports indicate European allies are also reconsidering their commitments. Countries like Germany and France have been scaling back financial aid, citing economic strain and political divisions at home. Ukraine's defense production is struggling. Weapon supplies from the West have slowed, and Kyiv has been forced to ration resources on the battlefield. Soldiers are facing equipment shortages, and morale is declining as the war drags on without clear victories. Even within Ukraine, Zelensky is under pressure. Opposition voices are gaining traction, with critics accusing him of dragging the country into an unwinnable war. The cost of living has skyrocketed, businesses are shutting down, and millions remain displaced. If Kyiv doesn't secure a diplomatic breakthrough soon, Ukraine could find itself completely isolated. For Zelensky, the reality is clear: either negotiate or risk economic collapse. Ontario is now threatening to cut electricity exports to the U.S. if the tariffs remain in place. And this isn't just talk. Ontario powers 10% of the U.S. grid, supplying New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. If Canada follows through, U.S. electricity prices could spike by 20%. Businesses would struggle, households would pay more, factories could shut down. The Biden administration is scrambling for alternatives, but there are no quick fixes. This escalation is particularly alarming because the U.S. power grid is already under strain. Recent extreme weather events have stretched supply chains thin, and a sudden loss of Canadian electricity could lead to rolling blackouts in major cities. Some in Canada are even calling for a ban on U.S. natural gas imports, which would skyrocket energy prices even further. This trade war isn't just about tariffs anymore. It's about economic warfare. And the impact goes beyond just energy. Auto manufacturing, a key industry in both nations, could be severely impacted. Factories in Michigan and Ontario share supply chains, and any disruption could halt production. The agricultural sector is on edge. Canada exports billions in food products to the US, and retaliatory tariffs could make groceries even more expensive. The financial markets are reacting. The Toronto Stock Exchange has already seen volatility, and analysts warn that continued trade disputes could weaken investor confidence in North America. Economists warn that if this dispute isn't resolved soon, both nations could slip into a recession. Both nations are walking a tightrope. If tensions keep rising, Canada's GDP could shrink by 1.2%, with export industries taking a major hit. U.S. consumers could face an extra $500 to $1,000 a year in rising costs. Farmers, manufacturers, and energy producers on both sides could suffer long-term damage. If Ontario cuts power, inflation could surge, putting the U.S. economy under even more pressure. Foreign investors are already watching closely, and confidence in both economies is at risk. Some analysts say the U.S. is gambling with its energy security. Canada has other buyers. China and the EU are eager to secure energy deals, and if Canada pivots away from the U.S., it could permanently alter the balance of power in North America. And for the U.S., this couldn't come at a worse time. Inflation is already high, political tensions are rising ahead of the election, and now, a full-blown trade war with its closest ally could make everything worse. The U.S. needs Canadian oil more than ever. Trade war and Keystone XL reversal. The U.S. once claimed it didn't need Canadian oil, but now it's pushing to revive the Keystone XL pipeline. Why has Washington changed its stance? How will the trade tensions between the two nations unfold? And can Canada make the U.S. pay the price for its energy policies? The U.S. reversal on Canadian oil. Just a few years ago, the U.S. boasted about reducing its dependence on imported oil, declaring that it could produce enough energy domestically. But reality is not that simple. Over 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada, a supply that cannot be easily replaced. In fact, many refineries in Texas, Louisiana, and Illinois are designed specifically to process Canada's heavy crude, not the lighter crude produced domestically. So, what changed? With energy prices fluctuating and the U.S. facing ever-growing fuel demands, it can no longer afford to ignore the stability of Canadian oil supply. This shift is most evident in the sudden push to revive the Keystone XL project, a 1,900-kilometer pipeline that was previously scrapped due to environmental concerns and political controversy. Donald Trump, who once dismissed the need for Canadian oil, is now backing Keystone XL, criticizing past administrations for blocking the project. But can reviving a single pipeline really solve the problem? U.S.-Canada trade war begins in March 2025. Starting in March 2025, the U.S. will officially impose a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, ranging from food products to industrial materials. This marks the most aggressive trade move between the two nations in recent history. In retaliation, Canada is hitting back with $155 billion Canadian dollars in counter tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting three key sectors: agriculture, beef, dairy, and wheat exports from the U.S. to Canada. Consumer goods, electronics, clothing, and automobiles driving up prices in Canada. Raw materials, aluminum, steel, and lumber, which directly impact U.S. industries. But Canada's most powerful weapon is yet to come: potential restrictions on oil and natural gas exports to the U.S., a move that could send American fuel prices skyrocketing. The big question remains: is the U.S. truly prepared to go head-to-head with Canada in this trade war? Canadian energy, a strategic necessity for the U.S. Canadian oil and gas, are not just important to the U.S., they are irreplaceable in the short term. Key figures: over 4 million barrels per day of crude oil from Canada supply U.S. refineries. Canadian natural gas is essential for heating homes, particularly in the northern U.S. during winter. Critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt from Canada fuel America's high-tech industries. What happens if Canada tightens its energy exports? U.S. gas prices could increase by 20 to 30% within months. Industrial and transportation costs would surge. American manufacturers would face material shortages. Meanwhile, countries like China and India could step in to secure Canada's resources, further weakening U.S. control over energy supply chains. If Washington truly wants energy independence, it needs a long-term strategy, not just trade tariffs. Keystone XL. Will it come back? Keystone XL was once seen as the key to strengthening U.S. energy security, but reviving the project isn't so simple. Supporters argue the project would create thousands of jobs in both the U.S. and Canada. It would ensure a stable oil supply, reducing reliance on the Middle East. Lower fuel prices would boost the domestic economy. Opponents warn the risk of oil spills threatens key water sources and the environment. Extracting oil from Canada's tar sands emits far more greenhouse gases than conventional oil. TC Energy, the original developer, has already abandoned the project. Who would step in to take over? Does the U.S. genuinely intend to revive Keystone XL, or is it just a pressure tactic against Canada? If the pipeline is not revived, how will the U.S. secure its energy needs moving forward?